Chapter 1. The hall light that lied it was the kind of December night that makes the city sound like it's chewing. Glass, wind in the gutters, taxis coughing, and the brownstone holding its warmth like a secret. Wolfe was in the office. The orchids upstairs were probably judging us, and I was doing what I do best, being available for incoming trouble. That's when the bell rang. He opened the door and found a man standing under the hall light, like he owned the place. Except he didn't own the one thing every man in a hallway gets for free: his shadow. The light made a clean puddle on the floorboards, and the man's shoes sat in it, but the darkness didn't gather behind him. I blinked once, twice. Wolfe's voice rolled out of the office like a slow drum. "Mr. Goodwin," I said, "boss. The hallway's missing something, like a conscience." The man looked at me without moving his head. "I need Nero Wolfe," he said. "I need him tonight." Wolfe appeared in the doorway, big as judgment, and studied the stranger the way a banker studies a signature. Then he said, "Quiet. He's standing where the truth should be." That was Wolfe. He could make a man's lack of shadow sound like a moral failure instead of a parlor trick. He didn't step forward. He didn't offer a hand. He simply stood in the office door, filling it, and waited for the stranger to commit himself to being real. "I am Nero Wolfe," he said finally, with the faint edge that meant he already disliked this. "Come in." The man came in. He moved like someone who had practiced moving without disturbing the air. He was not tall, not short, not fat, not thin, just neatly assembled. His coat was dark and plain, his hat in his hand, his shoes well cared for. He looked as though he might work in a bank or an office where papers mattered, and he had decided long ago to keep his face from revealing anything. He wasn't prepared to sign. I closed the door, bolted it, and because I was not born yesterday, clicked the chain as well. "If you will sit," Wolfe said, indicating the red leather chair. The man sat, his hands rested on his knees. He kept his hat, turning it slowly in his fingers like he was measuring time. Wolfe didn't sit right away. He waited. He liked the other man to feel the room. Wolfe's office did that to people. The desk was broad and immaculate. The walls were lined with books that had been read and remembered. The rug had been paid for once and intended to last. The chair by Wolfe's desk had held more bad news than any chair in New York, and Wolfe himself, massive, calm, and unmoved, was an atmosphere. I stayed by the side table for a moment, watching the client. There was something wrong beyond the missing shadow. That was the trouble. The missing shadow was so wrong it could distract you from the other wrongness. Wolfe sat behind his desk, folded his hands, and said, "Your name?" The man looked at him. "Elliot Frost." Wolfe's brows moved a fraction. "That is my name," Frost said. "Legally, occupation. I handle acquisitions for a private firm." Wolfe's mouth tightened. He hated vague words. Acquisitions of what? Frost's gaze flicked to me and back. Businesses, buildings, contracts, things that have value. "That is not an answer," Wolfe said. "It is a fog." "It is what I can say," Frost replied. I strolled to my chair, sat, and crossed my legs. "All right, Mr. Frost. You're an acquisitions man with a fog budget. How about telling us why you rang the bell at—" I glanced at the mantel clock. "A little after 9 on a night when only bad ideas are out walking." Frost's fingers stopped turning the hat. His voice stayed even. "Because I will be dead by morning." There are statements that demand a reaction, that one didn't get it from Wolfe. Wolfe merely looked at him as if he had said the soup was too hot. "Why?" Wolfe asked. "Because I have been told so," Frost said, "and because I have reason to believe it." "By whom?" "A man I did not know until yesterday." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Describe this man." "I cannot," Frost said, "not accurately." Wolfe made a sound that wasn't quite a snort and wasn't quite polite. "You have come here with an alleged threat on your life, and you cannot describe the person who made it." "I can describe what he did," Frost said. "Proceed." Frost took a breath. "Last night I was leaving my office. It is on 46th Street. I walked 2 blocks to the subway. On the corner by the entrance, there was a man standing under the light. He spoke my name. That got my attention in a practical way. People who can pick your name out of the air are either very well informed or very lucky, and neither is comforting. I stopped. Frost went on. He said, "Mr. Frost, you have exactly 24 hours. I asked him what he meant. He said, "You have exactly 24 hours to stop what you are doing." I asked him what I was doing. He said, "You are acquiring a building that does not belong to you." Wolfe's face did not change, but I saw the brief flicker in his eyes that meant the fog had lifted half an inch. I told him he was mistaken, Frost said. He said, "Number." I told him to go to. He hesitated, perhaps remembering Wolfe's requirement for civilized language. "To the devil," he said. "Then you will die." "Did you report this to the police?" Wolfe asked. "Number." "Why not?" Frost's mouth tightened. "Because I have reason to believe the police would be useless. Or worse." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Explain." Frost hesitated again. "My firm has connections. It does business. It has friends. It makes donations. It has arrangements. I am not nafade vey. If I go to the police, word goes to the wrong place before it comes back to me." Wolfe's face stayed as unmoved as his desk blotter. "So you came to me instead. That is not nefert. It is merely expensive." "I will pay," Frost said. He didn't say it with bravado. He said it with the flat certainty of a man stating that gravity still works. Wolfe nodded once, a gesture that meant he had heard the word pay and filed it. "Continue." Frost licked his lips. "After he said I would die, I laughed. Not because it was amusing, because it was unreal. And I walked past him. I went down the stairs. I took the train. I got home." "Where is your home?" Wolfe asked. "East 72nd Street." Wolfe's brows rose a fraction. He filed that too. Frost continued. "This morning, I went to work. At 11, I received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photograph. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a small envelope. He did not hand it to Wolfe directly. He placed it on the corner of Wolfe's desk as if it might stain the wood. Wolfe did not touch it. He looked at it. I leaned forward. "May I?" Wolfe nodded. So I picked up the envelope, slid out the contents, and held the photograph where both of us could see it. It was a picture of the front of Wolfe's house, not a postcard, not something a tourist buys. It was taken close enough that you could see the fine cracks in the stone, the ironwork of the stoop railing, and more than that, the hall light was on, and under it in the bright puddle on the floorboards was a pair of shoes. No body, no legs, no man, just shoes in light. I sat back slowly. "That," I said, "is either a sick joke or a professional warning." Frost's voice stayed steady. "There was a note," it said. "You have come to the right place. It will not help." Wolfe finally moved. He reached for the photograph with thick, careful fingers, as though it might bite. He examined it closely, then put it down. "How did this person obtain a photograph of my house interior?" he demanded. "That is why I'm here," Frost said. "Because if he can do that, he can do anything, and because." He paused, and for the first time something in his face shifted. Not fear exactly, a kind of reluctant disgust. "Because I believe he is right. I believe I have come to the right place, and I believe it may not help." Wolfe's eyes held him. "If you believe it will not help, you are wasting my time." "I am not wasting it," Frost said. "I am buying it. I am buying whatever you can do between now and morning." Wolfe's jaw set. If there was one thing he hated besides being made to move, it was being given a schedule by a stranger. "You said you will be dead by morning," Wolfe said. "At what time?" Frost stared at his hands. He said 24 hours. "He spoke to me at 9:15 last night. So, 9:15 tonight, or thereabout." I glanced at the clock again. 9:10. Wolfe saw my glance. Wolfe always saw glances. He turned his eyes back to Frost. "You are already in your final 5 minutes." Frost nodded once. Yes, that was when I noticed another detail that made my scalp tighten. Frost was not watching the time, not the clock, not his wrist, not the mantle. He was sitting as if time was a thing he had decided not to acknowledge, because acknowledging it would make it worse. That was a kind of courage, or a kind of denial. But either way, it was not the behavior of a man who had come to us for a simple consultation. Wolfe leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "Mr. Frost, I will ask questions you will answer. If you refuse, you will leave. And you may, as you say, be dead by morning. My interest in your survival is limited. My interest in clarity is not." "I will answer," Frost said. Wolfe's eyes bored in. "What building?" Frost's face tightened. "A brownstone. Where?" "West 41st Street. Wolfe's mouth compressed. "Owner. The owner is complicated." "Of course," Wolfe muttered. "All evil is complicated. The truth is simple." Frost held Wolfe's gaze. The building belonged to a man named Harold Vane. Wolfe's eyes shifted, just slightly. I saw it, and I knew Wolfe knew I saw it, and I knew he would pretend later that he did not. "Go on," Wolfe said. "Vane died 3 months ago," Frost said. "There is an estate, there is a will, there is a dispute. My firm is representing an interested party." Wolfe's lips curled faintly. "Your firm is acquiring?" "Yes." "Who is the interested party?" Frost hesitated. "A corporation." Wolfe's eyes hardened. "Name it." Frost exhaled. "Northland Properties." That name was not famous to the public, but I had heard it. Not because I ran with property sharks, but because New York is a small town disguised as a big one, and names that move buildings move into conversation. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. "And what is your part in this?" "I am the point man," Frost said. "I handle the negotiations, the paperwork, the pressure." "Pressure," Wolfe repeated. Frost nodded. Northland wants the building. There are occupants. They are being persuaded to leave," Wolfe said. "Evicted." Frost's jaw tightened legally. "Legality is not always decency," Wolfe said, and there was a faint note of disgust. Wolfe disliked bullies. He disliked them on principle. He disliked them even more when they tried to rent his intelligence. Frost said, "I am not here to be admired. I am here to live." "You may find admiration and survival equally scarce," Wolfe said. I cut in because Wolfe was starting to sound like he might throw Frost out on moral grounds, and I had seen the picture of shoes in light and did not want to miss what was behind it. "Mr. Frost," I said, "you've got a phantom photographer and a deadline. That's the outside. What about the inside? Anybody in your life who would enjoy watching you fall down dead?" Frost looked at me for the first time with something like irritation. "Numberybody has somebody," I told him. "Even saints, and you don't strike me as one, a wife. Number, a sweetheart. Number, an ex. Number, a partner you cheated. No partner, a colleague you stepped on." He hesitated. "There are always colleagues," I smiled. "That's a yes with a necktie." Wolfe snapped. "Mr. Goodwin." "I'm doing it," I said. "Boss, if a man has 24 hours and a ghost taking pictures of his shoes, we don't have time for delicate manners." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, but he did not object. That meant he agreed with me enough to permit my nuisance. To Frost he said, "List the persons who would benefit from your death." Frost's mouth tightened. "If I die, someone else takes my place." "Name them." "I do not know who would be chosen." Wolfe's patience wore thin. "You come here in mortal peril, and you do not know the structure of your own employment." "It is not a matter of structure," Frost said. "It is a matter of discretion. Northland is not transparent." Wolfe made a sound that meant he disliked both Northland and Frost's loyalty to it. At that moment, footsteps came from the back, and Fritz Brenner appeared in the doorway, immaculate as always, his face composed in the special way he had for displaying disapproval without being rude. He looked at Frost. He looked at Wolfe, he looked at me. "Dinner is served," Fritz said. Wolfe's eyes did not leave Frost. "Bring coffee here," he said. Fritz's brows lifted. He did not like coffee in the office. He liked dinner being eaten as dinner, but he nodded and disappeared, because Fritz had long ago learned that when Wolfe said "bring coffee here," it meant something had landed on the schedule and was not likely to be brushed off. Wolfe asked, "Do you have enemies among the occupants of the building?" Frost blinked. "Occupants, the people being persuaded," Wolfe said. "Evicted." Frost's expression shifted slightly, and there it was, distaste again. Not guilt, not sorrow. Distaste, as if the occupants were a complication he had hoped would stay on paper. "Some have resisted," he admitted. Wolfe said, "Name them." Frost's fingers tightened on his hat. "There is a woman, Harriet Klein. She has lived there for 20 years. She is stubborn." "Stubborn is not a motive," Wolfe said. "Continue." "There is a man named Caleb Sorrell," Frost said. "He claims he has proof the building was willed to a charity. He has threatened to go to the newspapers." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "That is interesting. There is a couple, Miguel and Dana Parry artists," Frost said. "They have refused every offer." Wolfe's face remained calm, but his mind was moving. You could almost hear it, the way you can hear a big safe door swinging shut. I leaned forward, and Harold Vane himself. "Anybody connected to him? Family?" "None," Frost said quickly. "He was alone." "People are never alone," I said. Frost's gaze flicked away. "He had an attorney." "Samuel Rook?" Wolfe's head lifted. "Rook?" "Yes, he handled Vane's will." Wolfe stared at Frost for a long moment. Then he said, "Why did you not mention this earlier?" Frost looked irritated again. "Because I did not know it was important." Wolfe's voice became colder. "If you are dying in 5 minutes, everything is important. Samuel Rook is a competent attorney, and I have had dealings with him. His name carries weight," Frost said. "Then you know him." "I know of him," Wolfe corrected. "Where is he?" Frost hesitated. "He is missing." I sat up. "Missing how?" Frost's lips pressed together. "He vanished 2 weeks ago. He did not come to his office. He did not answer calls. His firm reported him missing. The police have been." He stopped, and his eyes flicked to Wolfe as if he had almost said something he should not. Wolfe said, "I repeat, why did you not mention this?" Frost stared at his hat. "Because Northland does not want attention. A missing attorney invites attention." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "and a dead acquisitions man invites what discretion?" Frost swallowed. I said, "All right, this is getting cozy. Missing attorney, disputed brownstone, stubborn tenants, and a shadowless messenger photographing our hall. You've got the ingredients for a nice stew. The only question is, who's eating it?" Wolfe's eyes snapped to the clock again. 9:13. Frost's face tightened at last. He glanced at the clock too, Wolfe said. "Where were you at 9:15 last night when you were threatened?" Frost answered. "At the corner by the subway entrance, 46th and 6th. Wolfe said. "Where were you at 9:15 tonight?" Frost looked down at his hands. "Here. And where will you be at 9:15 plus 1 minute?" Wolfe asked. Frost's jaw clenched. "Still here, if you do not throw me out." Wolfe's mouth tightened. He disliked being manipulated by time, but he disliked a puzzle even more when it insulted him personally. And someone had taken a photograph inside his house, a thing no man was entitled to do. Wolfe spoke to me. "Mr. Goodwin, go to the front hall, observe." I got up, went to the hall, and stood under the light where the floorboards shone with that clean brightness. I looked down at my shoes. My shadow sat behind me as obediently as any good New Yorker's, a dark shape on the worn boards. I called, "Boss, my shadow is present and correct. It looks annoyed to be working overtime, but it's here." "Remain there," Wolfe called back. "Do not move." I stayed. The hall smelled faintly of winter coats and old stone. The wind outside made the windows murmur. Somewhere upstairs the orchids were sleeping in their warm, pampered gloom, unaware that someone had used our hall as a stage. From the office, Wolfe's voice continued, slow and precise. "Mr. Frost, who besides yourself has been inside my house?" Frost's voice came steady. "No one. You are lying," Wolfe said, and his voice was as calm as if he had said the weather was cold. Frost's reply came after a pause. "I am not." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "The photograph exists. It was taken from within, therefore someone has been inside. If you do not know who, then someone entered without your knowledge." "That is worse." I heard Frost inhale then, softly, "I sent a man earlier today." Wolfe's voice was dangerous now. "To my house?" "Yes," Frost said. "A private investigator, to see if you were truly here, if you were truly, as people say." I called out, "Boss, do you want me to bring him back in pieces?" Wolfe ignored me. "Name the investigator." "Martin Baird," Frost said. Wolfe's voice was flat. "And did Mr. Baird take that photograph?" "I don't know," Frost said. "He reported nothing. He did not call. He did not return." I stopped being amused. Missing attorney, now missing investigator. That makes a pattern, and patterns have teeth, Wolfe called. "Mr. Goodwin, return." I went back into the office and sat down, but I did not cross my legs this time. The room felt tighter. Frost looked paler. Wolfe's eyes were hard. "Mr. Frost," Wolfe said, "you are either a fool or a participant, perhaps both. You have brought an enemy to my threshold. You have allowed someone to violate my home. You have concealed relevant facts. And now you claim you will die in minutes." Frost's voice was strained. "I did not intend." "Intention is irrelevant," Wolfe said. "The facts remain." The clock ticked 9:14. Frost's breathing was audible now, a slight hitch he couldn't smooth away. Wolfe's eyes shifted to me. "Mr. Goodwin, the gun." That was not a sentence Wolfe used casually. I opened the desk drawer and took out the revolver Wolfe kept, more out of custom than affection. Wolfe disliked weapons. He disliked the need for them. But he was not sentimental about being shot. I placed it on the desk within Wolfe's reach. Wolfe said to Frost, "Do you have a weapon?" Frost shook his head quickly. "Numbers stand," Wolfe ordered. Frost hesitated, then stood. Wolfe's eyes flicked over him. "Mr. Goodwin, search him." I stood and patted Frost down. He was clean. No gun, no knife, no wire, nothing but money and keys and a small notebook with neat handwriting and a business card that said Martin Baird Investigations. The card made my stomach tighten. I showed it to Wolfe. Wolfe's face did not change. "Sit," Wolfe said to Frost. Frost sat, his hands trembling slightly. Now Wolfe looked at the clock. 9:15. Nothing happened. No bullet through the window, no gas hiss, no knife in the dark, no shadowless man materializing in the office like a bad thought. For a moment, the quiet itself was the threat. It felt like the house was holding its breath. Then the doorbell rang again. The sound was ordinary. That was what made it worse. I moved toward the door, but Wolfe's voice stopped me. "Mr. Goodwin." "Wait." He stared at Frost. "Is this your friend?" Frost's eyes were wide. "I don't know." Wolfe's gaze went to me. "Open the door cautiously, and if you see a man without a shadow, do not allow him inside." I went to the hall and looked through the peephole. A woman stood on the stoop. She was bundled against the cold in a coat that had seen better decades, and she held a scarf up over her mouth. Her eyes were sharp and angry, the kind of eyes that could cut glass or write letters to the editor without using an eraser. I opened the door a crack. "Yes?" She lowered the scarf. "Is Nero Wolfe here?" I said. "He is. Who are you?" "Harriet Klein," she said. "And if he has Elliot Frost in there, tell him he's got 5 minutes before I call the police. And this time, the whole neighborhood will hear me." Behind me, Wolfe's voice drifted from the office. Dry as old paper. "Mr. Goodwin, bring her in." I stepped back, and Harriet Klein came in, her boots tracking a little snow onto the hall rug, with the deliberate indifference of someone who did not care what a rich man's carpet thought. As she walked toward the office, she looked past me down at the hall light, and then down at the floorboards. Her eyes narrowed. "Funny," she said. "I thought this place had a shadow problem." That stopped me cold. I followed her into the office with the sensation you get when a puzzle turns and shows you a new edge. Harriet Klein stood in front of Wolfe's desk as if it were a counter, and she had come to return a defective product. She ignored me. She ignored Frost. She focused on Wolfe, because Wolfe was the only thing in the room worth arguing with. "You," she said, "are Nero, Wolfe." "I am," Wolfe replied. "And that," she said, flicking a finger toward Frost without looking at him, "is Elliot Frost." "Yes," Wolfe said. Harriet's mouth tightened. "He's trying to steal my home." Frost started to speak, but Wolfe lifted a hand, and Frost shut his mouth as if Wolfe had turned off the air. "I don't know what kind of tricks he's pulling, but somebody has been in my building, somebody has been in my hallway, and somebody took pictures." Wolfe's eyes sharpened. "Pictures of what?" Harriet's gaze shifted to me at last, and I felt the hard edge of it. "Shoes," she said. "Empty shoes in the light." Frost made a sound. Half breath, half shock. Wolfe's face stayed calm, but his eyes were alive now in the way they got when a case stopped being merely annoying and became personal. "Mrs. Klein," Wolfe said, "you will sit and tell me everything you know." Harriet Klein planted herself in the red leather chair as if she had been invited to do it for 20 years. Outside, the wind made the city cough again. Inside, the hall light kept shining, patient, innocent, and as I had already learned, capable of lying. Chapter 2, The Holiday Client 2 nights later. We brought him into the office. That's the phrase Wolfe preferred, because it suggested order and consent. What we actually did was steer him past the hall light, through the narrow space where truth had already developed a limp, and into the room where Wolfe conducted his private wars with logic. The red leather chair received him with a complaint, a long arthritic creak that sounded like it wanted a different line of work. The stranger sat. He didn't relax. He arranged himself the way a man does when he expects to be asked to stand again at gunpoint. "My name," he said before Wolfe could ask, "is Cal Hart." Wolfe studied him. Hart was in his early 40s, maybe late 30s if worry had been doing the heavy lifting. His coat was decent, but worn at the cuffs. His tie was knotted properly, but pulled too tight, like it was holding something in. His face had the grey patience of a man who had already explained himself to people who didn't listen. He said it plainly, as if reading from a ledger. "Someone is going to kill me on Christmas Eve." I leaned back in my chair. "That's a popular date," I said. "People love scheduling." Hart did not smile, not even to acknowledge the attempt. "They've already tried," he said, 3 times. Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction. "Explain." Hart clasped his hands, unclasped them, then forced them still on his knees. "First was a traffic incident. A truck ran a red light and missed me by inches. Second was a fall. Scaffold collapse outside my office. I wasn't supposed to step back when I did. Third was gas. My apartment. Someone loosened the line. I came home late." "No witnesses," I said. "No evidence." Hart agreed. "No follow. Up like I wasn't supposed to be seen dying. Just erased." Wolfe's voice was dry. "Why come to me?" Hart looked directly at him. "Because they leave messages." Wolfe's brows rose slightly. "Messages. Riddles," Hart said. "They say you like riddles." I snorted. Wolfe ignored me. Hart reached into his coat and produced an envelope. He didn't toss it. He didn't slide it casually. He placed it carefully on Wolfe's desk, as though it were a small bomb and politeness might keep it from going off. Wolfe nodded once to me. I picked it up, opened it, and withdrew a card. Holiday red, cheap paper. The kind you buy by the stack at a drugstore where nobody asks questions. The ink was black and heavy, the handwriting deliberate and blocky. like someone who wanted to remove personality from the act. I read it aloud. When you find my shadow, you find my hand. Christmas Eve. Midnight. The light will tell the lie. I looked up. That's festive. Hart swallowed. That was on my doorstep this morning. Wolfe did not reach for the card. He had memorized it already. Do you know what it means? No, Hart said. But I know what it refers to. Proceed. Hart hesitated. His eyes flicked, not to the door, but upward, as if checking the ceiling for listeners. There's a building, he said. Warehouse conversion on West 20th. My firm manages it. We installed a new security system 6 months ago. Motion sensors, cameras, lighting. The lights don't behave properly. I leaned forward. How so? They're too clean, Hart said. Too perfect. No shadows in certain corridors. The angles are wrong. It's been reported. But the technicians say it's impossible. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Impossible things are merely unexamined. Hart nodded. That's what the notes say. They reference light, shadows, visibility, as if someone learned how to stand where they shouldn't exist. Wolfe's voice was flat. And you believe this someone intends to kill you? Yes. Why you? Wolfe asked. Hart's jaw tightened. Because I signed something I shouldn't have. Wolfe waited. Silence was one of his tools, and he used it with professional care, Hart said. A waiver, an override. It allowed a private contractor access to the system during overnight hours. No logs. Wolfe's mouth compressed. You facilitated invisibility. I didn't know, Hart said quickly. I was told it was for maintenance. I believed them. Belief, Wolfe said, is not a defense. It is a luxury. Hart's hands clenched. When I realized what it could be used for, I tried to reverse it. I filed an internal report. 2 days later, the truck nearly killed me. Wolfe nodded slowly. And now Christmas Eve. Yes, Hart said. Midnight. The building will be empty. The system resets then. Wolfe's eyes flicked to the clock, then back to Hart. You will remain here until I decide otherwise. Hart stiffened. I can't stay long. There are things. You will, Wolfe said, cutting him off cleanly, unless you prefer to test that prophecy. Hart hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Instead, something else happened. He stood up, too fast, like a man reacting to a sound only he could hear, and moved toward the door. Hey, I said, half rising. Nobody said you were dismissed. Hart ignored me. He reached the threshold, where the hall light spilled its dishonest brightness onto the floorboards. I watched his feet. Still no shadow. Me stomach tightened. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Wolfe saw it. Wolfe always saw it. Hart paused with his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around, but his voice carried back to us low and urgent. If I die, he said, look for the man who never looks up. Then he was gone, swallowed by the light, leaving behind nothing but the echo of his shoes and a riddle that had already started to smell like blood and pine needles. Wolfe did not move for several seconds. Finally he said, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. Christmas, Wolfe said slowly, is approaching. I detest holidays. I nodded. They do tend to complicate murder. Wolfe's eyes were cold now, alert in a way that meant the puzzle had teeth. This, he said, tapping the card with one finger, is not a coincidence. It is a system, and someone believes he has learned how to remove himself from sight. I glanced toward the hall light, still shining with innocent precision. Well, I said, if the light is lying, somebody taught it how. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Then we shall teach it how to tell the truth. Outside, the city moved toward Christmas with its usual enthusiasm, sales, songs, and goodwill stacked like decorations. Inside, a man without a shadow had just made an appointment with midnight. Chapter 3. A body before breakfast the next morning. The city gave us a gift with receipts. I was still negotiating with my first cup of coffee black, hot and judgmental, when the bell rang. Not the tentative ring of trouble feeling its way in, but the firm, official press of someone who knew exactly where he stood with the law and intended to remind us of it. I opened the door to a uniformed cop who looked apologetic about being alive so early, and a plainclothes man who looked like he'd been awake all night arguing with the universe and losing. Inspector Kramer wore his face the way a man wears a hat he sat on by mistake, creased, irritated, and beyond repair. "Goodwin," he said, stepping in without waiting for an invitation, "you had a visitor last night." "That's not a crime," I said. "In this house we call it a weakness." The uniform followed him in respectful, but alert, the way cops get when they're inside Wolfe's brownstone. The house had a reputation. It made men stand straighter and talk less. Wolfe was already in the office, planted behind his desk with the morning paper folded precisely at his elbow. He looked at Kramer with the calm tolerance he reserved for indigestion and the police. "Good morning, Inspector," Wolfe said. "To what do I owe this intrusion?" Kramer didn't bother answering. He reached into his coat and tossed a photograph onto Wolfe's desk. Like it was evidence, and an accusation rolled into one, I leaned over before Wolfe could object. The picture showed a man face down in grey slush beside the river drive, coat open, one arm twisted under him, at a wrong angle that made my spine itch. His hat lay a few feet away, brim bent. His eyes were open, staring at that indifferent stretch of winter sky that never apologizes for anything it lets happen underneath it. Calhart time of death was helpfully written on the back in police shorthand, sometime after midnight, cause of death. A neat, professional stab tucked under the ribs where the heart doesn't have much room to complain. Wolfe's eyes moved from the photograph to Kramer's face. His voice, when he spoke, was mild, which is how it gets when it's dangerous. "Mr. Hart left my house alive." "Sure," Kramer said. "And I'm the Easter Bunny." I straightened. "Easy, Inspector. You look ridiculous with imaginary ears." Kramer ignored me. He had Wolfe in his sights, and that was a hobby he indulged whenever he could get away with it. "He shows up here last night," Kramer said. "He leaves. Sometime after that, he takes a knife under the ribs down by the river. That makes this address interesting." Wolfe sniffed. "This address is always interesting. It is not, however, culpable," I said. "Any witnesses?" Kramer's mouth twisted. "Only a doorman who swears nobody left the building after 10. "That's impressive," I said. "Most doormen don't swear to anything before coffee." "And a taxi driver," Kramer went on, "who picked up a man with his hat pulled low. Said the guy told him he didn't like streetlights." That landed harder than Kramer probably intended. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. "The riddle," he said, "was not a flourish. It was instruction." Kramer snorted. "Instruction for what?" "For how the crime would be committed," Wolfe said calmly. "And how it would be misinterpreted." Kramer stared at him. "You want to translate that into something that doesn't sound like a lecture?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to me. "Mr. Goodwin, you will." I sighed. "All right, Inspector. The deceased was fond of riddles. Or someone fond of riddles was fond of him. Either way, the message talked about shadows, light, and lies. Mr. Hart didn't like streetlights. Now he's dead in the open where streetlights don't forgive you for standing still." Kramer frowned. "That's poetic. It's not evidence. It's context," Wolfe said. "And you ignore context at your peril." Kramer's jaw tightened. "I ignore a lot of things, Wolfe. What I don't ignore is a dead man who was sitting in your office hours before he died." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "Mr. Hart left against my explicit instruction. I did not detain him, nor did I escort him to his death." "Convenient," Kramer said. "Accurate," Wolfe corrected. I said, "Inspector, did you find the murder weapon? Number any blood trail? Number signs of a struggle?" Number I smiled thinly. "That sounds less like a crime of passion and more like an appointment." Kramer glared at me. "You want to be careful, Goodwin." "I am," I said. "That's why I'm asking questions instead of wearing handcuffs." Wolfe spoke again, his voice even. "Inspector, Mr. Hart believed he was being hunted by a man who understood how to manipulate light." Kramer barked a humorless laugh. "Now you're telling me we've got a ghost?" "No," Wolfe said. "We have a man who wishes to appear as one." Kramer shook his head. "You always do this. You dress it up, At the end of the day, somebody stabbed him. Yes, Wolfe agreed, but the success of that stabbing depended on misdirection, on being unseen where one should be seen. Kramer leaned forward. And you think that gets you off the hook? I think, Wolfe said, that if you waste time considering me a suspect, the man who committed this murder will enjoy his breakfast. That gave Kramer pause. Not because he liked Wolfe, but because Wolfe was rarely wrong in ways that mattered. Kramer straightened. You got 24 hours. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. How generous. After that, Kramer said, I come back with a warrant and a lot less patience. He turned and headed for the door, the uniformed cop following him with a final curious glance at the desk, the books, and Wolfe himself, as if trying to memorize the room in case he had to describe it later. The door closed, the house settled. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, find what casts no shadow in a lighted hall, I said. That narrows it down to vampires, stage magicians, and men who know more about wiring than they should. And do it, Wolfe added. Before the police decide, I am the one holding the knife. I drained my coffee and stood. All right, I'll start with the building. Lights don't lie on their own. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Number they are taught. Outside, the city was waking up with all the enthusiasm of a hangover. Somewhere between the River Drive and Christmas Eve, a man had figured out how to disappear just long enough to kill. And Wolfe hated nothing more than a trick that pretended to be cleverer than it was. Chapter 4. The Man Who Never Looked Up. I started where every New York mystery starts, with people who watch doors for a living. If you want to know who comes and goes, you don't ask the tenants. You ask the man whose job it is to notice shoes. Hart's Building had a doorman named Eddie Pike, a thick-necked guy with a winter coat, stretched tight across the shoulders, and a face that had learned patience the hard way and didn't care for it. Eddie looked at me like I was interrupting a long argument he was winning. Nobody left after 10, he said. I'd know. That's a strong statement, I said. Men have gone to prison on weaker ones. He folded his arms. I don't blink on duty. I took the photograph of Cal Hart from my pocket and held it where Eddie couldn't avoid it. He ended up dead, River Drive. After midnight, so either he flew, teleported, or you missed him. Eddie's jaw worked. He didn't look at the picture long, but he didn't look away fast either. Hood up, clipboard, signed and left. That's thin, I said. New York eats thin stories for breakfast. Eddie's eyes narrowed. I'm not finished. I waited. Head down, he said. Whole time, like he was allergic to ceilings. Never looked up, I asked. He shook his head. Not once. Like the ceiling had a warrant. That rang a bell, and not the pleasant kind. I took out my notebook. What name did he sign? Eddie turned, reached under the desk, and produced the log. He flipped to the right page and jabbed a finger at the entry. The signature was a mess. 2 sharp letters and a smear, like someone had written in a hurry or with gloves on. It looked less like a name and more like an excuse. I copied it down carefully. Anyone else? I asked. Eddie shook his head. That was it. I slipped the notebook away. Thanks, Eddie. If you remember anything else, even something that feels stupid, call me. He snorted. Nothing stupid about a dead tenant. No, I agreed. Just inconvenient. My next stop was Hart's office address, printed neat and respectable on his business card. Hart and Lane Imports. The building had all the seasonal cheer money can buy. Wreaths in the lobby, a fake pine tree shedding dignity by the elevator, and a faint smell of cinnamon trying to cover up desperation. The receptionist was young, bright, and wrapped in holiday sparkle that didn't reach her eyes. She smiled at me the way people smile when they've been told to smile. I'm looking for Mason Lane, I said. Her smile tightened. He's in a meeting. I held up my card. Tell him it's about Cal Hart. The sparkle vanished. She picked up the phone. Lane's office was glass and confidence. He stood when I came in, tall, trim, and well put together, shaking my hand like it was a business deal he planned to win. Archie Goodwin, he said. Cal mentioned you. That's a good sign, I said. He mentioned a lot of people who aren't around to complain anymore. Lane's mouth tightened. Cal was paranoid. So I hear. He told me he hired Nero Wolfe. Lane went on. I thought it was theatrics. He liked dramatic gestures. Did he like dramatic deaths? I asked. Lane's eyes hardened. This is serious. It always is when somebody stops breathing. I said. Let's talk enemies. Lane spread his hands. Everyone has enemies. Cal had competitors. That's vague, I said. It's business, Lane replied. I let my eyes wander. Lane's desk was tidy in the careful way. Too careful. Under a paperweight shaped like a reindeer sat a stack of holiday cards. They were identical to the one Wolfe had received. Same cheap red stock, same blocky black print, same cheerful lie dressed up as festivity. I picked one up. Lane cleared his throat. Seasonal mailers. I picked one up. Lane cleared his throat. Seasonal mailers. I looked at him. Sure, and I'm Santa's accountant. Lane's smile didn't move. They're harmless. Funny, I said. One just got a man killed. Lane's eyes flicked to the door, then back to me. You're making assumptions. That's my job, I said. Your job is telling the truth. He leaned forward. Cal signed things he shouldn't have. He stuck his nose into systems he didn't understand. If someone scared him, that doesn't make it murder. It does if the scare comes with a knife, I said. Lane said nothing. I placed the card back under the reindeer. Who printed these? Lane hesitated. That was enough. I'll find out, I said, standing. One more thing. Did you ever notice Cal avoiding light? Lane frowned. What do you mean? Streetlights, hall lights. Any place shadows behave. Lane shook his head slowly. Number. Then you weren't watching closely, I said. Outside, the cold hit like a reminder. The pieces were lining up now. A delivery man who never looked up, a signature that didn't want to be read. Holiday cards that weren't meant to spread cheer, and a man who had learned where to stand so the light would do his lying for him. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes half closed, fingers steepled. When I finished, he said, the man who never looked up was not afraid of ceilings. No, I said. He was afraid of shadows. Wolfe nodded once, and rightly so. I looked at the hall light, shining faithfully, hiding nothing and everything. Boss, I said, whoever did this learned how to disappear without leaving. The trick isn't magic. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Number it is preparation. And Christmas, I added, is still coming. Wolfe closed his eyes. Then the murderer believes himself clever. That was when I knew he was in real trouble. Chapter 5. The light that tells the lie back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened, while I laid it out in full, because partial truths are an insult in that house. I didn't spare the details. Eddie Pike's delivery man with his hood up, and his head down like gravity was optional, the smeared signature that didn't want to be remembered. Mason Lane's office with its glass confidence, and its stack of cheerful red lies hiding under a reindeer paperweight, Cal Hart's last performance, standing where shadows were supposed to live, and refusing to cast one. Wolfe sat behind his desk, eyes half closed, fingers steepled, absorbing it all the way a bank vault. Absorb sound. When I finished, the silence lasted long enough to make me wonder if I'd missed something obvious. Then Wolfe opened his eyes. The hall light, he said, is not decoration, it is evidence. I stopped pacing. Boss, the hall light is a plain bulb. It's been hanging there since Calvin Coolidge was pretending to be cheerful. It's not a Broadway spotlight. No, Wolfe agreed, but it can be persuaded to lie. That alone was enough to get him out of his chair, which meant the matter had crossed from theoretical to personal. Wolfe disliked movement. He despised tampering. Someone had done both in his house. He moved into the front hall, standing beneath the fixture with his hands clasped behind his back, staring up as if interrogating it. Archie, he said, bring a ladder. I blinked. You're serious, entirely. Wolfe did not climb ladders. Wolfe believed ladders were for men with poor judgment and smaller stomachs. The fact that he wanted one told me the light had already confessed. I fetched the ladder from the back and set it beneath the fixture. At Wolfe's nod, I killed the main switch. The hall dimmed instantly, shadows snapping back into place like employees returning from break. I climbed up, feeling like a burglar breaking into my own address. "Proceed carefully," Wolfe said. "Observe before touching." "I'm observing," I said. "I'm also questioning my life choices." The glass bowl came loose in my hands with suspicious ease. It wasn't dusty enough. It hadn't been disturbed by age. It had been disturbed by intent. Inside, between the bulb and the bowl, sat something pale and wrong, a thin, milky insert, plastic hand-cut, crude but effective. I exhaled slowly. "Boss, you're going to like this about as much as indigestion." Wolfe stepped closer, craning his neck. "Remove it." I did and climbed down, handing it to him. He examined it with reverent disgust. "It diffuses the light," Wolfe said. "Softens it, alters the angle, eliminates hard contrast." "Translation," I said. "It turns shadows into suggestions." Precisely, a man standing close to the wall would cast no discernible shadow on the floor, especially if he positioned himself carefully. I nodded, which explains Hart and the delivery man, and why nobody noticed anyone leaving. "A trick," I said. Wolfe shook his head. "A rehearsal." That stopped me. A rehearsal for what? For convincing observers, especially intelligent ones, that the phenomenon was inherent, not engineered. Wolfe said, "The trick was crude, temporary. It was meant to be discovered." "Then why let Hart die?" I asked. "If the illusion was the point, why kill the volunteer?" Wolfe's gaze went inward, the way it does when the puzzle locks into place, but the consequences haven't finished arriving. "Because Mr. Hart was not the objective," Wolfe said. "He was punctuation." "That's poetic," I said, also unsettling. "The murderer wished to demonstrate mastery," Wolfe continued. "Not merely of light, but of fear. Mr. Hart's death authenticated the riddle." Before I could argue with that, the phone rang. I picked it up. Inspector Kramer's voice came through rough and tired, like he'd been grinding his teeth on the case. "Your boy left prints on the hall fixture, only the kind that belong there," I said. "We're sentimental about fingerprints." "Lab found something else," Kramer said. "Powder residue on Hart's coat, metallic. Fine, reflective, like something brushed him before he died." I looked at Wolfe. He had gone perfectly still. "A reflective surface," Wolfe murmured, "used to redirect ambient light, or to cancel a shadow at close range." Kramer went on. "Not enough to scream weapon, enough to whisper planning." I sighed. "You know, Inspector, I hate holidays," Kramer snorted. "Christmas Eve murders ruin everyone's mood." After I hung up, Wolfe set the diffuser down carefully, as if it were evidence, and an insult rolled into one. "The murderer understands light," Wolfe said. "Understands how to make it dishonest." "And shadows," I added, "or how to erase them." I leaned against the banister, staring at the fixture. Now honest again, throwing shadows the way nature intended. "Lane had the cards printed," I said. "Hart signed access waivers. The building system was modified, and someone brushed Hart with something reflective before slipping a knife into him." Wolfe nodded. "The illusion required access, rehearsal, and confidence." "Confidence enough to invite you," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said coldly. "That was the error." I smiled thinly. Wolfe returned to his desk and sat, reclaiming his territory inch by inch. "Next," he said, "we gather the principles, here under honest light." "Office gathering," I said. "Holiday edition." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "There will be no goodwill." Outside, the city was hanging lights and pretending cheer. Inside, Wolfe had exposed the lie hiding in his own hall, and somewhere, a man who believed he had mastered darkness was about to discover that Nero Wolfe preferred his truths bright, unavoidable, and fatal to arrogance. Chapter 6. The import that didn't belong. I dug into Hart and Lane the way a dentist digs into a tooth that's been lying about not hurting, slowly, methodically, and with the expectation that something ugly would eventually come to the surface. On paper, the company was clean enough to eat off. Hart and Lane Imports, respectable name, modest profits, steady accounts, no shell games that jumped out, no offshore whispers, just a mid-level importing firm doing business in a city that pretends not to notice how much of its soul arrives in crates. Their inventory wasn't glamorous. Seasonal décor made of plastic optimism, cheap electronics that hummed when they shouldn't. Novelty items designed to be purchased under bad lighting and regretted in better ones. Snow globes, artificial wreaths, blinking ornaments shaped like emotions. Nobody really felt, which was why the odd thing stood out like a knife on a dessert plate. I was at a borrowed desk in their secondary office, one of those rooms nobody cared about enough to lock properly, flipping through shipment manifests, while a junior clerk hovered nearby with the nervous cheer of someone who had been told to cooperate, but not confess to anything. Most of the entries were dull enough to make you nostalgic for paperwork you'd already hated. Item codes, weights, destinations, nothing that made your pulse change. Then, I saw it, reflective film, industrial grade. I read it twice, then a third time, just to be sure my eyes weren't decorating reality. Reflective film wasn't gift wrap. It wasn't packaging. It wasn't something you needed to make a plastic Santa sparkle. Industrial, grade reflective film was used for controlling light, redirecting it, dampening it, cancelling glare, altering visibility. Storefront displays used small amounts of it. Sure, but not in bulk, and not quietly. I copied down the shipment number, destination code and date. Then I leaned back in my chair and looked at the clerk. Where did this go? He blinked. Warehouse, Jersey side. Of course, I said. Everything that wants to avoid New York ends up there. He didn't laugh. He wasn't sure he was allowed to. I thanked him, which startled him more than if I'd yelled, and left before anyone decided to ask me who I was and why I cared. The warehouse sat exactly where warehouses always do, on a stretch of land that smelled like trucks, river air, and exhausted ambition. The kind of place that existed solely to hold things nobody wanted to think about until they were gone. Inside, forklifts hummed with the patient resentment of machines that knew their work would never be admired. Crates were stacked high enough to make gravity nervous. Men in work jackets moved with the efficient indifference of people paid by the hour, not the question. The foreman came over when I started reading labels too carefully. Roy Danner, thick wrists, thinning hair, a jaw that suggested he'd learned early on that crates don't argue back. You lost? He asked. Inventory, I said. Short visit, long questions. He sighed. Figures? We walked. I asked about seasonal shipments, he answered in numbers. I asked about rush orders, he shrugged. I asked about reflective film. That, he said, goes out with display supplies. Storefront stuff. Holiday glare control, you know. I know, I said. Any of it go missing. He scratched his jaw. A roll, maybe two. Inventory's a joke this time of year. A joke that gets people killed, I asked. He stopped walking. What? I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I kept moving. Warehouses have corners that don't get visited unless something goes wrong. I found one of those corners under a tarp that hadn't been disturbed by hope or inspection in weeks. Under it sat a portable work light. Not the kind you use to fix a fuse. High, powered, adjustable, mounted on a stand with multiple joints. The kind professionals use when they want to control exactly where light falls and where it doesn't. I crouched. On the metal stand was a smear, dark, sticky, uneven, not paint. I straightened and looked at Roy. That's not mine, he said quickly. Too quickly. No, I said. It's not, but it might be your problem. His face went pale in stages like a man realizing the floor plan had changed while he wasn't looking. I didn't press him. Pressing men like Roy Danner just made them defensive, and defensive men forgot details. I left him standing there with his warehouse suddenly, feeling less friendly than it had that morning. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption. That was the ritual. I talked, he absorbed. The house seemed to lean in with him. The books, the desk, the rug that had witnessed more human failure than most churches. I told him everything. The reflective film, the missing rolls, the warehouse, the work light, the smear that refused to be ignored. Wolfe sat with his fingers steepled, eyes half closed, a pose that meant his mind was very much awake and somewhere unpleasant. Reflective film, he said finally, can redirect light with great precision. Properly placed, it can erase a shadow from a specific observer's angle. I nodded. So our killer walks like a ghost because he brought his own daylight and a mirror. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. Or because he wanted others to believe he did. That stopped me. You think the illusion mattered more than the result? I think, Wolfe said, that the murderer values perception over efficiency. He wished to be seen, or rather, not seen, in a particular way. I paced. Heart signs waivers, lane prints cards, somebody rehearses in our hall, somebody practices in a warehouse, somebody kills a man with a knife after brushing him with reflective powder. Yes, Wolfe said, and someone wants credit for cleverness. That was when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found nothing but cold air and a card on the stoop. Holiday read. Cheap paper, same blocky print. The shadow is not missing. It is owned. Come to the tree. I brought it in. Wolfe read it once. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. Excellent, he said softly. He is no longer hiding. Outside, the city glittered with forced cheer and borrowed light. Inside, the truth had decided to step forward. Shadow or no shadow. And Christmas was coming whether anyone deserved it or not. Chapter 7. Christmas Greens and Cold Motives. The tree turned out not to be poetic at all, which in New York is often the most dangerous thing about a clue. It was literal, the City Plaza tree, 40 feet of evergreen optimism, jammed into a square of concrete and wired to glow like a public confession. Every December it arrived with speeches, music, and photographers, and every January it vanished quietly, leaving behind needles, receipts, and a collective sense of relief. In between, it stood there doing its civic duty, making people forget rent, weather, and whatever private arithmetic they were trying not to do. Tourists loved it. Locals pretended they didn't. Everyone, without exception, agreed to look up. Wolfe, of course, did not go. He regarded public gatherings the way a cat regards bathtubs, with suspicion, disdain, and a firm intention to stay dry. Crowds offended his sense of order. Weather offended his comfort. And the idea of standing outdoors at night for symbolic cheer struck him as an intellectual misdemeanor. Instead, he sent me, which was his version of exercise and his idea of fairness. You will attend, he said, seated behind his desk like a monument to stubbornness. Observe carefully and refrain from being killed. Season's greetings, I told him. You really know how to make a man feel cherished. He waved that away. The murderer desires an audience, I do not. That was Wolfe in a nutshell. He disliked spectacles unless he was directing them. I went armed, not just with the revolver snug in its shoulder holster, but with a pocketful of patience and the kind of synthetic cheer you can buy in a pharmacy aisle next to the cough syrup. New York was drowning in it. Bells clanged from storefront speakers. Recorded voices sang about joy in keys that suggested contractual obligation. Garlands hung from lampposts like festive restraints. Every window glowed as if the city had decided light alone could pay its debts. The plaza was crowded enough to make anonymity easy and violence easier. Families with children perched on shoulders, faces tilted upward in practiced wonder. Couples holding hands the way people do when they want proof later. Tourists aiming cameras skyward as if the answers might be strung between branches. Vendors hawked roasted chestnuts that smelled better than they tasted and cocoa that promised comfort but delivered sugar and regret. I didn't look up. That was important. The murderer wanted eyes lifted. He wanted necks craned. He wanted shadows to behave the way people expected them to behave. So I kept my eyes level and my attention low, walking the perimeter with the patient indifference of a man who belonged there. That's how you watch people in a crowd. You don't hunt. You wait. You let the river move past you. Hands first, eyes second, feet last. Hands tell you what a man is prepared to do. Eyes tell you what he's afraid of. Feet tell you how soon. Every face looked innocent enough to be guilty. I made one circuit. Then another. Nothing jumped out. No obvious tale, no familiar faces pretending not to be familiar. No man standing too still or moving too carefully, which meant one of two things. Either nothing was going to happen, or it already had, and I was late. It happened disguised as clumsiness. A man bumped me, hard enough to be real, soft enough to be planned, shoulder to shoulder, just enough weight behind it to register as contact instead of accident. His coat brushed mine, his breath puffed an apology that didn't bother to sound sincere. "Sorry," he muttered. He didn't look up. That did it. I caught his sleeve before he could drift away with the rest of the coats and scarves. "Hey," I said mildly. "You dropped something." He froze. Not long, just long enough to confirm instinct. "Let go," he said. Still no eye contact. His chin stayed tucked, his gaze fixed somewhere around my collarbone, as if the world above that point didn't exist or wasn't safe. "Not until you learn manners," I said. "It's the season." He twisted free with surprising strength and vanished into the crowd like a rumor nobody wanted to trace. Gone so cleanly it felt rehearsed, like a move he'd practiced in front of a mirror, or more likely, in front of a light. In my hand was a small envelope. I hadn't felt him put it there. That, too, was the point. I stepped out of the flow, ducked behind a vendor's cart that smelled like burned sugar and ambition, and opened it. Inside was a narrow strip of reflective film, cut with care, and a folded note. The paper was cheap, the handwriting wasn't. I read it once, then again. "Lane is the ladder. The hand is higher. Midnight brings the account." No signature, no flourish, no warmth, just direction. Lane was the ladder, meaning Mason Lane wasn't the architect. He was infrastructure, something you climbed on to reach a better view, or something you kicked away when you were done. Either way, he wasn't the hand that held the knife, and he wasn't the mind that planned the lighting. The hand was higher, that suggested money, authority, access. Someone who didn't need to dirty himself with reflective film and portable lights because he could tell other people to do it. Someone who understood that shadows were not just physical phenomena, but social ones, places where blame could be made to fall. I didn't linger. Lingering gets you dead in crowds. I moved with purpose back through the plaza, letting the tree blaze behind me like a lie everyone had agreed to share. Above it, the night sky absorbed the light without comment, the way it always does. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe took the strip of reflective film between his fingers with professional distaste, as if it might infect him with stupidity. He didn't look up at the ceiling or toward the hall. He didn't need to. He understood the geometry now. "He is arranging a tableau," Wolfe said, "and the holiday provides the audience." "Stage lighting crowd," I said. "All that's missing is the finale." Wolfe's eyes lifted, sharp and cold. "Midnight," he said, naturally. "So who's the hand?" I asked. Wolfe's gaze sharpened further, and I knew he was already fitting names into places. "Someone above Mr. Lane," he said. "Summoner, who profits when others are blamed. Someone who controls the light, financially, structurally, and psychologically." I thought of import manifests, warehouse lights, security systems, and a man who never looked up because he already knew where illumination came from. That was when the case stopped being clever and started being dangerous. Because men who control light rarely forgive having it turned on them. And Christmas Eve was approaching like a deadline nobody intended to miss. Chapter 8. The accounting of darkness. You don't have to be a genius to know money is the best liar in town. It smiles. It nods. It signs its name in ink that looks permanent, and then it quietly steps out of the room while someone else takes the fall. Wolfe knew that as well as he knew orchids, and possibly liked it even less. He had me pull records. He phrased it politely: invoices, payment histories, consulting agreements, the legal way, meaning we didn't. and I just did it carefully enough that nobody could prove otherwise. Wolfe disapproved of illegality in theory and tolerated it in practice, provided it was neat and didn't interrupt his schedule. Hart and Lane's books were clean in the way a well-swept sidewalk is clean, orderly on the surface, with everything unpleasant pushed into the gutter. Most of the expenses made sense: shipping fees, storage, marketing, seasonal labor. But one line item kept recurring with the stubborn regularity of a bad habit. Consulting services, G. Heller. No department attached. No deliverables listed. Just a steady drain of cash monthly, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes in amounts that suggested urgency rather than planning. Not enough to scream fraud, enough to whisper influence. I followed the whisper. Grant Heller had an office in a midtown building that prided itself on neutral colors and neutral morals. The lobby smelled like new carpet and old deals. The receptionist smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who had learned long ago not to ask questions that might require answers. Heller's office was glass and confidence. He stood when I entered, hand extended, smile ready. It was a good smile, professional, controlled, and completely disconnected from his eyes. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, like he'd been practicing. "I expected you." "People who expect me usually regret it," I said, shaking his hand and making a mental note of his grip. Firm, careful. No sweat. He gestured to a chair. "Coffee. Number a seat." I took it and made it look like I was doing him a favor. Heller sat opposite me, crossing his legs with the casual ease of a man who believed his furniture would never be repossessed. He folded his hands, leaned back slightly, and regarded me as if I were an interesting article he'd already read the conclusion of. "Cal Hart was unstable," he said without preamble. "Nero Wolfe should not have involved himself." I smiled. "Funny. That sounds like advice from someone who wants Wolfe uninvolved." His smile twitched, just a little. "I'm concerned for reputations, yours, his." "Mine survived worse," I said. "And Wolfe's allergic to concern." Heller sighed, the way men do when they want you to think they're burdened by responsibility. Hart made poor decisions. He signed documents he didn't understand. He frightened himself. "Into being stabbed?" I asked. "Into creating drama," Heller said smoothly. "The rest was unfortunate." I leaned forward. "You're listed as a consultant." "Yes, for what?" "Risk assessment." "That's vague." "Risk usually is," he replied. I let my eyes wander. You can tell a lot about a man by what he chooses to display. Heller's walls held abstract art, nothing that could be traced to a place or a memory. His desk was immaculate. Too immaculate, not a paper out of line. The kind of desk you clear when you don't want anyone to know what you were working on. His gaze flicked, briefly, toward the window. Below us, the streetlights were already coming on, throwing yellow pools onto the pavement. He looked at them the way some people look at dentists. I said, "You ever notice how everyone casts a shadow?" Heller's eyes snapped back to mine. His smile tightened. "Depends on the light." "That's funny," I said. "I was going to say it depends on the angle." We sat there for a moment, the air between us doing arithmetic. "Mr. Goodwin," Heller said finally, "if you're suggesting I had something to do with Hart's death—" "I'm not suggesting," I said. "I'm listening." That annoyed him. Annoyance is a luxury men like Heller don't indulge often, but it slipped through the cracks. "Cal Hart was a liability," he said. "He panicked. He talked too much. He involved people he shouldn't have." "Like Wolfe," I said. "Yes. And you," I added. He didn't answer that. When I stood to leave, he rose with me, all courtesy restored. "I hope this conversation stays theoretical." "It usually doesn't," I said. Outside his office, I passed his assistant. A woman in her late 20s with sharp eyes and a careful walk. Nina Rusk, according to the nameplate. She was sliding a stack of cards into a desk drawer. Holiday cards, cheap red stock, block print, identical to the ones Lane had, identical to the one that had summoned me to the tree. Same lie, mass-produced. She glanced up, startled, then smiled too quickly. "Happy holidays," she said. Same to you, I replied, and meant something else entirely. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded. The house was quiet in that expectant way it gets when a solution is almost ready to be served. Mr. Heller arranged the finances, Wolfe said. Mr. Lane arranged the logistics. The faceless messenger arranged the fear. And Hart? I asked. Wolfe's voice went quiet. Hart arranged his own disappearance until he could not. The altered lighting, the rehearsal in my hall. Hart was learning how to be unseen. He intended to escape consequences by becoming a rumor. And Heller? I said. Heller intended Hart to become a corpse, Wolfe replied calmly. A lesson is more effective when it cannot speak. I thought of Heller's eyes flicking toward the streetlights, of Nina Rusk filing away lies like stationery, of Mason Lane climbing and being climbed on. Midnight, I said. Christmas Eve. Yes, Wolfe said. Mr. Heller believes he controls the light. He believes he controls the account. And you? I asked. Wolfe opened his eyes fully, and there it was. The look that meant the trap was built and baited. I intend, he said, to audit him. Outside, the city kept shining, convinced that brightness was the same thing as safety. Chapter 9. Midnight, and the own shadow Christmas Eve arrived like a debtor who knew exactly what you owed, had calculated the interest, and intended to collect with a smile that never reached the eyes. The brownstone was warm in that deep, deliberate way Wolfe preferred. Radiators ticking softly, curtains drawn against the city's gaudy cheer. The front hall restored to honest illumination. Upstairs, the orchids were smug in their regulated heat, blooming on schedule, and judging us all for lacking discipline. Fritz had prepared dinner with ceremonial care, but none of us had touched much of it. The night had teeth, and Wolfe was calm. That was the most dangerous sign of all. Wolfe sat behind his desk as if it had been built around him, broad hands folded on the blotter, eyes half-lidded in that meditative way that meant the puzzle had already resolved itself, and the rest was merely instruction. He had invited them all, and he had done it precisely the way he did everything else. By implication, not request. When Nero Wolfe asks you to come to his office, you come, or you confess by absence. They arrived in the order Wolfe expected. Mason Lane came first. He was overdressed for an office gathering and underprepared for a reckoning. His suit was expensive and slightly too new, his tie knotted too tight, his jaw working as if he were chewing arguments he hadn't yet deployed. He took one of the red leather chairs and perched on the edge of it, posture rigid, hands clasped together, like he was afraid they might testify on their own. Grant Heller arrived next, immaculate and unhurried, coat brushed, shoes polished, smile in place. He looked around Wolfe's office with professional curiosity, as if appraising a space for resale, rather than entering a room where the air itself would soon be cross. Examined, he nodded to Lane, nodded to me, and waited for Wolfe's acknowledgement. Wolfe did not give it. Roy Danner followed, uncomfortable in a borrowed suit that pinched at the shoulders and betrayed him at every seam, no matter how much cologne he had used. He still carried the smell of warehouses and long hours' dust oil, and the faint anxiety of a man who had never expected to be important to anyone's evening plans. He stood until Wolfe inclined his head, then sat with the careful stiffness of a man bracing for bad news. Nina Rusk entered quietly, almost apologetically. She carried her purse close, posture composed, expression neutral in a way that took practice. If you didn't know better, you might have thought she was there to take notes. Her eyes flicked once around the room. Exits, angles, faces, then settled into stillness. Inspector Kramer arrived last, because Wolfe enjoyed nothing more than timing his conclusions to the presence of authority. Kramer's coat was open, his hat tucked under his arm, his face carved into its familiar expression of professional skepticism and personal irritation. He nodded to me, grunted at Wolfe, and planted himself where he could see everyone at once. They were all there. The office smelled of winter coats, damp wool, polished leather, and guilty breath. Outside, the city hummed with bells, horns, and last, minute cheer, oblivious to the fact that a small, private accounting was about to be conducted on West 35th Street. Wolfe folded his hands on the blotter and began softly, the way a man speaks when he is certain of his footing. Cal Hart entered this house and appeared to cast no shadow. Lane snorted, unable to stop himself. That again, that phenomenon, Wolfe continued, unperturbed, was staged. Lane leaned forward. Staged by who? Wolfe turned his head slightly, his gaze settling on Lane with the weight of a filing cabinet. By you, Mr. Lane. You altered the hall light. Lane's face flushed, the color climbing from his collar to his temples. That's insane. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. It was. Kramer shifted his weight. Get to the point, Wolfe. I am at the point, Wolfe replied. Mr. Lane feared exposure. He feared that Mr. Hart, having grown alarmed by the scope of your activities, would reveal a scheme involving diverted shipments and falsified invoices. Lane surged halfway out of his chair. That's a lie. You exploited your position at Hart and Lane to reroute certain imports, specifically reflective film and specialized lighting equipment, under the guise of seasonal merchandise. You did so to facilitate demonstrations and rehearsals intended to intimidate Mr. Hart and others. Heller smiled faintly. This is imaginative, thank you, Wolfe said. It required imagination to attempt it. Kramer barked. Wolfe. Permit me, Inspector, Wolfe said. Kramer hesitated, then nodded. He had learned, the hard way, when to let Wolfe finish. Wolfe continued. Mr. Heller provided the financial structure and laundering. He concealed irregularities beneath consulting fees and risk assessments that never occurred. He ensured that no single discrepancy appeared significant enough to invite scrutiny. Heller's smile thinned speculation. Accounting, Wolfe corrected. And motive? Wolfe's gaze moved to Roy Danner. Mr. Danner's warehouse supplied the materials, reflective film and portable lighting, without full knowledge of their ultimate purpose. Roy swallowed. I didn't know. I believe you, Wolfe said. That is not a defense. It is merely a tragedy. Roy's shoulders slumped, relief and fear tangling together. Wolfe turned his attention to Nina Rusk, who had gone very still, and the messenger who never looked up. Wolfe said, was not a phantom or a professional assassin. It was you, Miss Rusk. The room contracted, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. You kept your head down, Wolfe went on. To avoid ceiling cameras and reflective angles, you delivered messages, cards, and fear. You understood that anonymity is most convincing when it appears habitual. Nina's fingers tightened on her purse. Her voice, when it came, was steady. I followed instructions. Indeed, Wolfe said. From Mr. Heller. Kramer leaned forward, voice sharp now. So who killed Hart? That was the question everyone had been circling, and Wolfe let it hang for a moment, savoring its weight. Silence is an instrument, and Wolfe played it expertly. Then he turned his head slowly and fixed his gaze on Grant Heller. The hand is higher, Wolfe said. Mr. Heller needed Mr. Hart dead, but he also needed Mr. Lane blamed. Heller laughed once. Short, brittle. That's nonsense. Wolfe inclined his head toward me. Archie. I opened the desk drawer and laid the evidence out carefully, one piece at a time, like a dealer arranging cards for a final hand. The roll of reflective film, the identification tag from the portable worklight recovered at the warehouse, photocopies of payment trails, Heller's money flowing into places it shouldn't have gone, and finally, a small glass vial containing a gritty, metallic smear. Metallic powder recovered from Mr. Hart's coat, Wolfe said, matches the residue on the reflective film. The film was pressed against him during the struggle. Mr. Heller arranged a confrontation in a location with strong directional lighting, using the film to confuse witness angles and camera glare. Kramer's jaw tightened. Where? By the river drive, Wolfe said. Under the maintenance lamps. The lighting there is fixed, predictable, and harsh. Ideal for manipulation. Mr. Hart believed he could disappear. Mr. Heller ensured he did not. Heller stood abruptly, You can't prove. And that was when he made the mistake that ended everything. He looked up, not at Wolfe, not at Kramer, at the ceiling. Because Wolfe had anticipated this. Before the gathering, he had instructed Fritz to adjust the office lamp so it cast light straight down, clean, unfiltered, and merciless. No diffusion, no angles, no room to cheat. Under that light, in front of everyone, Grant Heller's shadow fell sharp and undeniable on the rug, dark, complete, and owned. The room went utterly silent. Wolfe spoke quietly, almost gently. The truth is not in the absence of shadow, it is in who controls the light. Grant Heller, you're under arrest. Heller's smile collapsed, the last of his composure dissolving as the light held him fast. Outside, midnight passed unnoticed by the city. Inside, the account was settled. Chapter 10, The Truth Steps into the Light. Inspector Kramer moved like a man who'd been waiting all night to stretch. He came out of his chair with that old city economy, no wasted motion, no drama, just a straight line from decision to action. His hand closed on Grant Heller's arm, as if it had been built for that particular sleeve. And for half a second, the office wasn't Wolfe's office at all. It was a corner of the city where a single twitch could turn reason into violence. Heller jerked back, eyes wide, the neat mask finally cracking. His gaze skated from Kramer's face to Wolfe's, then to me, then down to the rug, where his shadow lay like a signed confession. He looked like a man who had spent his life believing he could step out of consequence the way he stepped out of sight, by angle and arrangement. He couldn't. Easy, Kramer said. Don't make it worse. That was the funny thing about Kramer. He could sound like he was offering mercy while tightening a grip. Maybe he was. Maybe he knew there were nights when dignity was the only thing left to bargain with. Heller's mouth worked. He tried for a smile and got something closer to a spasm. You can't do this on Wolfe's parlor tricks, he snapped, but the words didn't carry. The room had already moved past them. Wolfe sat behind his desk, motionless, watching with the calm interest of a man observing a scientific demonstration he had predicted. His hands rested on the blotter. His expression was mild, which is how it gets when it's most dangerous. He said nothing. That was worse for Heller than any speech. Nina Rusk made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the kind people make when their insides don't know which emotion is safer. Then the tears came. Not loud tears, no pretty sobbing. They were small, furious tears that slid down her cheeks as if they were ashamed to be seen. She pressed her lips together hard enough to turn them white. Mason Lane slumped in the red leather chair as if somebody had pulled the plug on his spine. He had been sitting upright a few minutes ago, full of strained indignation, clinging to the last scraps of a story he told himself at night. Now he looked emptied out, his shoulders rounded, his hands limp. The ladder had discovered what it meant to be climbed. Roy Danner stared at the floor, like he hoped it would open and swallow December. Whole, his face had the stunned, hollow look of a man who realizes he has been standing too close to machinery, without understanding what the gears do. Kramer tightened his grip. You're coming with me, Heller. Heller's eyes snapped up. You think you've won? Wolfe's voice came at last, almost bored. No, sir. I think you have lost. It wasn't a flourish. It wasn't a moral pronouncement. It was arithmetic completed, spoken aloud so the room could hear the sum. Heller's mouth opened, and I could see the next move forming. Outrage, denial, a lunge toward the door, a frantic attempt to break the pattern with noise. He didn't get the chance. I had taken one step closer without anyone noticing. That's my trade. When Heller shifted his weight, I shifted mine. Our bodies negotiated the outcome without words, and he read the result in my eyes. Don't. He didn't. Kramer steered him toward the door. Nina hesitated, clutching her purse, and Kramer's head turned slightly. You too, he said. She swallowed, nodded once, more like obedience than agreement, and moved after them. Lane did not resist when the uniformed cop, who had arrived quietly through the side door before the gathering began, placed a hand on his shoulder. Lane looked up as if he expected sympathy. He got procedure. Roy Danner started to stand, then sat again, then stood for real, unsure which was safer. Kramer paused at the threshold and looked back at him. "Don't go anywhere, Dana. We'll talk." Roy's head bobbed too fast. "I won't." The door closed behind them with a final click that sounded like the end of a chapter. The brownstone exhaled. The office settled back into its usual sounds, the faint tick of the clock, the distant murmur of traffic, the soft sigh of radiators doing honest work. The air still held the scent of wet wool and fear, but the sharp edge of it had gone. Wolfe remained seated, his gaze drifting to the desk lamp Fritz had adjusted. The light fell straight down, clean and uncompromising, making the papers on Wolfe's desk look like they had been laid there for judgment. Wolfe's shadow sat beneath him like a loyal dog. He looked at it for a moment, then at the front hall beyond the doorway. "Restore the hall fixture," he said. "Yes, sir," I said. I went out to the hall, climbed the ladder again, and put the glass bowl back the way it belonged, without the milky insert. It felt like undoing a profanation. The light came on and cast shadows, the way shadows had always been meant to fall, honest, obedient to physics, free of human ambition. When I returned, Wolfe was still staring at the doorway. "You are thinking," I said. "I am finished thinking," Wolfe replied. "I am contemplating the persistence of stupidity." "That's a city-wide problem," I told him. He made a sound that might have been agreement or indigestion. I poured myself a drink after a night like that. You either pour a drink or start talking too much. Talking too much gets you killed in this line of work. I offered Wolfe a glass. He accepted it with a nod, though he barely touched it. For a minute we sat with the quiet. It's a particular kind of quiet, the kind that comes after a room full of lies has been emptied out. It isn't peaceful exactly. It's just clear. Like the air after someone opens a window. "Finally," I said. "So Hart wasn't the target. He was the spark." Wolfe nodded once. Mr. Hart attempted to purchase safety with mystery. He believed that if he made himself strange enough, if he could appear to be beyond ordinary rules, he could step away from ordinary consequences. "And instead," I said, "he purchased attention." Wolfe replied, "The one commodity he could not afford." I stared into my glass. The amber looked warm, which was a lie of its own heart. Cal Hart. The guy had come to Wolfe's office like a man wearing his last few hours. He'd sat in our red leather chair and told us the date of his own death, the way a man tells you the time of a train. He'd carried a riddle like a badge and a warning, and then he'd bolted for the door, into that hall light, with no shadow and too much hope. "You think he planned the no-shadow bit?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes shifted to me. He participated in it. He was learning it. "Learning to disappear," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Mr. Hart believed he could make himself untouchable by becoming unaccountable. It is a childish dream, but adults indulge it frequently." I nodded slowly. "So he signs the waiver for the building system, thinking he's getting maintenance, and instead he's getting a doorway to a trick." "Precisely, he facilitated the apparatus," Wolfe said. "He did not understand who would ultimately use it." "Or how?" I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Or why?" I got up, crossed to the desk, and looked at the items still lying there. The roll of reflective film, the work light tag, the payment copies, the vial of metallic grit. They looked harmless on Wolfe's desk. Everything looks harmless on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe's desk can make a murder weapon look like a paperweight. "Walk me through it," I said. "All of it, for my peace of mind and your vanity." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "My vanity does not require your participation." "Sure," I said. "Humor me anyway." He sighed. A sound of mild annoyance that meant he would proceed at length. "The initial riddle," Wolfe said, "was not intended to amuse. It was intended to instruct. The phrases about shadow and light were literal, but their purpose was psychological. They created a narrative, an expectation, that Hart's death would involve the manipulation of visibility. The light will tell the lie," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. That line was both an explanation and a warning. The perpetrator wished Hart, and later, you to focus on the phenomenon rather than the mechanism. People love a mystery. They will overlook a screwdriver if you offer them a ghost. I snorted. New York would pay admission to that. Wolfe continued. Mr. Lane arranged the logistics, the cards, the access, the convenient placement of materials. He also altered the hall light here, with the crude diffuser you discovered, not to create a flawless illusion, but to plant the idea firmly in our minds. So we would believe in the trick, I said. So you would talk about it, Wolfe corrected. And so the police, when they heard about it, would consider it significant. Which it was, I said. Yes. Wolfe conceded, but only as a tool. The murderer did not require the hall light at all. He required only our attention. I sipped my drink. And Heller, Wolfe's eyes hardened. Mr. Heller arranged the structure. He used his consulting payments to obscure cash movement, to compensate accomplices, to purchase equipment, and to ensure that responsibility could be shifted to others when necessary. He selected Mr. Lane because Lane was ambitious and morally flexible. And Nina, I said. Wolfe nodded. Miss Rusk was useful. She was observant, obedient, and eager to be close to power. She delivered messages because messages create fear, and fear produces compliance. She kept her head down, I said, to avoid cameras. Wolfe's lips compressed. Yes, she learned to move through controlled spaces without offering her face to recorded angles. It was not mysticism, it was caution. I leaned on the edge of Wolfe's desk. Okay, so Hart gets scared. He wants out. Mr. Hart attempted to reverse the agreement, Wolfe said. He attempted to expose irregularities. And that made him a liability, I said. Indeed, Mr. Heller does not tolerate liabilities. He converts them into lessons. That sentence landed with the chill of a morgue, I said. But why the River Drive? Why not stage the whole thing at the building with the lighting system? Wolfe's eyes lifted. Because the building contained too many variables, too many cameras, too many potential witnesses, too many routes of inquiry. The River Drive offered harsh, predictable lighting and the appearance of randomness. A man stabbed on a dark road is a city story. A man stabbed in a controlled hallway is a case. And Heller didn't want a case, I said. He wanted a corpse, Wolfe said. Preferably one that pointed away from him. I nodded slowly. So he uses reflective film. Yes, Wolfe said. The metallic residue on Hart's coat was crucial. It indicated contact with a surface treated to manipulate light. The reflective film can redirect a bright source. It can also create glare that interferes with observation, human and mechanical. Under the maintenance lamps by the drive, a sheet of such film could produce a temporary visual confusion. A witness might see movement, not detail. A camera might capture flare and blur. And Hart, I said, goes down before he can shout. Wolfe's expression remained mild. A knife under the ribs is efficient. It is quiet. It does not require a firearm and its inconvenient noise. Then the taxi driver, I said. The guy who said he didn't like streetlights. Wolfe's eyes sharpened slightly. That was a useful detail. A man who speaks such a line is performing. He is contributing to the narrative. A planted line, I said. Or a man repeating a line he has rehearsed, Wolfe said. In either case, it reinforces the theme, light, aversion, mystery. I frowned. And the doorman, Eddie Pike swearing nobody left after 10. Wolfe shrugged slightly. Doormen swear frequently. They are often sincere. They are also often mistaken. A delivery man at 11 provided the necessary exception. The man who never looked up, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Miss Rusk entered and exited with her head down, presenting herself as ordinary. Ordinary is invisible in New York. People see only what announces itself. I let that sit for a moment. Outside, a car horn blared in the distance, then faded. The city was still celebrating Christmas Eve as if the calendar could cancel murder. I said, So how did you know it was Heller? I mean, beyond him being the kind of man I'd like to trip down a staircase. Wolfe's mouth tightened. I object to your phrasing, but I will answer. Mr. Heller revealed himself through his relationship with light. I raised an eyebrow. You mean his hatred of streetlights? Precisely. In your report, you stated that Mr. Heller's gaze flicked toward the streetlights and that he appeared discomforted. A man who is merely guilty does not fear streetlights. A man who has made light his instrument does. He knows what it can do when uncontrolled. Because uncontrolled light shows everything, I said. Yes, Wolfe said, and because he had trained himself to look downward, to avoid cameras and angles, to maintain control. When confronted with my lamp, direct and vertical, he looked up instinctively to locate it. That instinct betrayed him. I grinned. A man who never looks up, finally looks up. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Do not be sentimental. Me never, I said. We sat again. Fritz appeared at the door, quiet as ever. The inspector has telephoned, he said. He asks if you will speak with him. Wolfe's expression soured. He disliked phone calls almost as much as he disliked crowds. Very well, he said. Bring the telephone. Fritz brought it. Wolfe took the receiver with the weary patience of a man accepting an unavoidable chore. Inspector, Wolfe said. Yes, I am aware. You have him. Excellent. No, I do not care about your opinions of my methods. Because I am correct. You may question Mr. Lane and Miss Rusk separately. Their accounts will be inconsistent. That will amuse you. Good night. He hung up, as if ending a conversation were a physical act of cleanup, and to confirm that Heller had, indeed, attempted to bargain. Bargain how? By offering names, Wolfe said. And money, I snorted. He's consistent. Yes, Wolfe said. Consistently contemptible. I stood and wandered to the window for a moment. The street beyond was lit with small strings of bulbs, storefront displays, and the occasional taxi headlight sweeping over wet pavement. People walked with packages and scarves and the illusion that the night was harmless. The hall light behind me cast a long shadow of my body on the floorboards. I watched it for a second, because after days of talking about shadows, the presence of one felt oddly reassuring. It was mine. It belonged to me. It did not lie. I turned back. So what happens to Roy Danner? Wolfe waved a hand dismissively. Mr. Danner will endure inconvenience. The police will question him. He will complain. He will return to his warehouse and vow to do inventory properly, and he will fail by spring. And Lane, I said. Wolfe's eyes cooled. Mr. Lane will discover that ambition without competence is merely a fast route to humiliation. And Nina, I said, softer. Wolfe regarded me. Miss Rusk will attempt to portray herself as a minor functionary. She is not. She delivered threats. She facilitated fear. She will, if the law does its work, experience consequences. And Heller, I said. Wolfe's voice was as steady as a verdict. Mr. Heller will learn that light is a poor ally. It reveals as readily as it conceals. I finished my drink, Hart, I said again, because it stuck. He tried to buy safety with a trick. Wolfe nodded, and he purchased only attention. From the wrong people, I said. From the only people he could attract, Wolfe corrected. Men like Heller do not tolerate unpredictability. They eliminate it. I looked toward the hallway again, and the no-shadow trick. Wolfe's eyes flicked to the doorway, a cheap illusion like most evil. Cheap, I repeated, thinking about the milky insert hand, cut plastic in a fixture that had been honest for decades, and it almost worked. It worked precisely as intended, Wolfe said. It distracted, it frightened, it created a theme. It encouraged you, and the police, to look for the marvelous rather than the mundane. I smiled. But you looked for the mundane. I looked for the mechanism, Wolfe said. Marvel is for fools and children. I laughed once. Because if you don't laugh at Wolfe's moral certainty, you end up either worshipping him or hitting him, and both options are unhealthy. Outside, a distant church bell rang somewhere. Somebody was singing. Somewhere else, somebody was arguing about a cab fare. The city kept its holiday mask on, lights and music and people pretending the world was simple. I poured myself another small drink, strictly ceremonial this time, and left Wolfe with his untouched glass and his satisfied silence. Before I went upstairs, I stood one last time in the hall under the light. My shadow stretched behind me on the floorboards, long and honest. It did not try to impress anyone. It did not attempt to be clever. It simply existed, as proof that the laws of the world still held, at least inside that house, for once that felt like a gift. And in a city where gifts are usually traps, I took it without asking why.